Many investors are just coming in because they want to see a multiplication on their investment. And you have to understand that there are those two types of investors. There's an investor that really believes in the company and vision, and they're probably going to ride it out, whatever happens. But then there's also the investor that sees the timing, the team, access to capital, news flow. They think they're going to make 2x, 3x, whatever their goal is, and they're going to be in and out. And that's good. That's a good thing. We want that sort of activity in the market and want to be able to supply wins for those types of people and traders. There is a bit of a negative skew on day traders and volume and investors coming in and out. But that's part of what makes a good stock and what makes an interesting story. But the nice thing is both of those groups want to see approximately the same thing. Is really comes down to communication.
So welcome to today's conversation. We're joined by Carl Hermansen. He's an accomplished marketing and advertising executive with deep expertise in financial media, investor relations, and public market positioning. And this is particularly within Canada's dynamic capital markets, the CSE and other markets up there. So he's based in Vancouver, Canada. Carl currently serves as a senior development officer and agency services manager at INN, the Investing News Network. And that's one of Canada's leading financial media platforms, and they're recognized for independent investment insights and investor education. So I highly recommend their platform, and we've used them in the past and expect to continue using them in the future. Over the course of his career, Carl has successfully led marketing and promotional initiatives for numerous private and publicly traded companies, significantly enhancing their visibility and credibility within the investor community. He's worked across multiple sectors of companies ranging from technology to mining to healthcare to psychedelics to cannabis and everything in between. So he's got a proven track record of helping companies tell their stories and to position themselves strategically in the market while maintaining compliance. Beyond his media work, Carl is a seed investor and strategic advisor at Nusa Nickel Corp. And that's a nickel mining operation in Indonesia that provides North America's only pure play access to the world's leading nickel district in central Indonesia. And he also serves as an advisor at a medical device company. So Carl, I'd like to thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for having me.
So I'm looking forward to hearing about your experiences that are going to relate here to Born Defense. I'm Mike Arnold. I'm the founder of Born Defense. Our company was built on the belief that strength must also be anchored in justice, that investments in national security should be filtered through the just war doctrine, and that our mission is to end the forever wars and uphold peace through strength. So with our mission here at Born Defense, it's to ensure that capital supports legitimate defense, responsible deterrence, and ethical strength. And Carl's insights on marketing, in particular with small cap companies like ours and investor communications, that can speak directly to how defense firms like Born Defense and others can build credibility and trust in the markets, maintain transparency, and to allow the shareholders and the public at large to look in to see if a company is maintaining their culture aligned with their claimed values and ethics. So let's dive on in. So for getting started here, Carl, can you give us just an overview of your background and experience in marketing and advertising, how it relates to the capital market experience for companies and investors alike?
For sure, Mike. I really appreciate that introduction and look forward to diving in. So I've spent the last 7 years with the Investing News Network, as you said, covering various sectors, predominantly mining, but also life science, technology, cryptocurrency, and emerging sectors. And through that time, I've learned a lot in the different ways that public companies will position themselves, either before listing, through listing, or on their journey as a publicly traded company. And through this, I've seen definitely some ups and downs in the way that people are going to go about their activities from a public markets and capital markets perspective, and some do's and don't do's. Also from the investor perspective, it's important to understand what's going to resonate with an investor in your sector and going to make them want to be part of your story and your milestones. So that would be kind of how I've covered over the last few years on learning about the various sectors, and that what brought me as an interested party to Born Defense.
So Carl, so you're our VP of marketing, and we've known each other for a few years now. We've worked together, and you've come on here to Born to help us out. And the way I sort of pitch this to you is that I come from a trial lawyer background. I come from a business background, and what I've always seen myself as a sort of chief storyteller of a client's position or a company's position. And I always think storytelling doesn't really do stories justice, because the best stories are true, right? So I always look at sort of the what I see the negatives in the capital markets, the things that leave sort of a bad taste in people's mouth, is like the lack of transparency or the storytelling in a way that maybe overly inflates a press release. So, just judging from what you've seen in the past, like what are the unique challenges for investor relations and public market positioning in general?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I think it comes down to a few different verticals of what's going to make a successful public company. Of course, first and foremost, being in capital markets, you need access to funding, you need access to capital, you need individuals that can either go out and raise money, or you need the backing of a financial group or institution. So that's kind of a non-negotiable, no-brainer. You're going to need access to funding to bring your brand and your vision to light. Also, you're going to need timing. Timing is crucial. We've seen good teams, we've seen good products, good projects without the right timing in the market. Maybe it was not the right time for a gold mining company or for a life science company or a cannabis company. Even though they had a great team and a great product, access to capital, the timing just wasn't right. After that, of course, you're going to need team members. Team members is the most important. I would say that's one of the things I learned early on as a novice investor. Still, I'm a novice investor, but learning lots every day. Is that really you want to invest in a team? You need high quality individuals that are passionate. I would say you need a mix of kind of reputable, well-known industry folks that are specific to your needs and wants. But you're also going to need some startup culture, as you've mentioned before, and we've talked about. You're going to need some hungry individuals that will go out and do the work, and you're going to need a bit of a broad set of skill sets to really cover all the different verticals. Seen before, teams that are predominantly legal teams or teams that are predominantly geologists in the mining sector, and if you're all kind of in the same sector and you all have the same background, the same schooling and education, it's a bit of an echo chamber, right? So it's important to bring in people from all walks of life. Not necessarily all walks of life, but from different backgrounds to come in and really create a successful company. So myself, honestly, the number one thing to look for as an investor or as a company that's looking to be marketed is having a robust team.
Yeah, I mean, in general, investors, we don't invest in companies, we invest in people, right? And what is a company other than a manifestation of a few people's will? Like you've got a group of people with a common purpose, a common desire, and investors need to know that those people can be trusted, for starters, right? I mean, that's the same thing with sales. Like in sales, you got to be a good salesperson. You got to be trustworthy. You got to have a good product. You got to have passion for the product, and you got to tell the truth about the product. And the product, largely for startups at the beginning, at least, is the people. The people are the product. Like, what is an investor buying? Are they buying stock in a company that's got an existing brand? If the answer is no, and it's truly a startup, you're really investing in an idea and these guys' ability to deliver on it. So how does an investor look at a team and get underneath the hood and figure out if their leader's worth following?
Yeah, and that's where I think you have to do your due diligence and do your research, especially this day and age, especially with younger investors. People will buy off of headlines or hype, but you need to do your research on those individuals and their backgrounds. Like you said, do they have a good track record? Are they well known in their field? What was the last few deals that they're on? These are all important things to consider. And again, a diverse team that has that different sets of backgrounds, right? And then beyond that, I mean, you have to consider the actual projects and the assets of the company. You have to consider what they're working on and if that's something that's really going to be able to make an impact on the markets that they're serving. And not only that, is that product able to be understood, comprehended, digested by an investor within a few minutes of a pitch? Again, seen a lot of really great products and offerings, really great teams with funding. But if the product takes 20 minutes to explain, or if you're talking about mining, if the asset is very complex or it's way up north or whatever reason it might be, if the product that you're trying to sell is too complicated, then you're not going to be able to sell your paper to an investor. So it has to be the right time, the right people, access to capital, the right project or product. And then, of course, you need your ability to communicate to the market. I would say that's the last cornerstone, is you need to have a succinct message. You need to have a powerful brand that resonates with your investor community. Doesn't need to resonate with the entire market, doesn't need to necessarily resonate with your neighbor or the guy down the street at the convenience store, but you need to have a brand that appeals to your investor demographic.
So what are some of the pitfalls or like early mistakes of some of these small cap companies or folks entering the public markets for the first time? What should they be looking for? And thus, what should an investor be looking for these people to avoid?
Yeah, I mean, a big problem right now, and this is a roundabout way to answer your question, but a big problem right now that's happened for the last couple of years in Canada, and I believe in the States, and we cover some companies in Australia, and as well as Europe. A kind of a global issue with small cap stocks right now is the drain that's being put on new investor capital from crypto. And I say that as a full crypto advocate and being heavily invested and interested in that sector. It is something that you have to be aware of. There's a lot of young people making a lot of money in crypto. That money is not necessarily leaving crypto or that sort of ecosystem, but you are competing with that whole new world of digital currency and 24-hour trading. Now, there's things that the market is doing to draw those investors in. There's products that are coming online with tokenized stocks, other RWA assets. You have some 24-hour trading opportunities. So the market in general is working on how to deal with that. But it is something to keep in mind that it's a bit different than it was 10, 20 years ago on, okay, you have people coming up through their 20s and 30s, they're starting to make some money, starting to have some savings, then you're able to capture them and get them to become investors into the stock market. It's not quite as simple as that anymore. And of course, we're dealing with inflation. We're dealing with lots of, economic problems outside of the market. So people need to pay their bills, need to buy, they want to buy an apartment or a home. So they're struggling with things that maybe are a bit more acute than they could have been in the past. And it's just a very crowded world. It's a loud world right now. There's lots in the media. There's lots of positive, but there's also lots of negative, lots of fear and greed out there. So you're really going to have to cut through all that and learn how to communicate with your potential shareholder after you first determine who that person might be and give them a message that will be something that will resonate with them and make them want to follow you along on your journey. And then past that, there's some other immediate pitfalls.
Well,
Again,
let's just kind of talk about the getting the people's attention, right? First, you got to get their attention. So you're telling me there's it's a lot of noise, not a lot of signal, and you got to get through all that in order to catch an investor's attention to begin with, right? But even if you catch their attention, you have to show them the people that may be sacrificing money for this deal versus this deal, or in the case of a smaller investor pool, some of these retail investors may be sitting on the sidelines because of these inflationary concerns and other economic downturn concerns that compete for their money and not just their attention. But what I found interesting is the competition with crypto. You mentioned competing with a 24/7 market. So the market doesn't close with crypto, does it?
no, it's 24-hour trading.
So that reminds me a bit of people, or like, let's say Las Vegas casinos competing with online gambling, right? Like if I got to go to the trouble to go somewhere or wait for the bell to open the exchange in the morning versus sitting on my computer and pushing at the slot machine on crypto, I can get my dopamine hit anytime I want. So how do you communicate to these investors that, look, it's exciting to be on crypto and maybe it's a good deal, but there's another avenue out here. For instance, the Canadian Securities Exchange or the OTC markets in the United States. Like, how do you tell that broader message about the markets in general? Like, why are they exciting? Why should they bother?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's not one that is easy to answer. But I think the most important thing is the exchanges, the organizations, from a tax perspective, really from the government top down, there needs to be an easy on ramp from people that have already succeeded in crypto to come into the market. That's kind of going to have to be number one. And then beyond that, there are exchanges. I don't have off the top of my head, but there are lots of groups that are looking into 24-hour trading. You can obviously trade futures and derivatives with the market. So these things are expanding and growing. Of course, you can trade Asian hours or the Australian market. There's always options, but you are kind of competing with that. So your average young day trader, they have now this choice of like, do you want to day trade stocks, or do you want to trade cryptocurrency, or you can't really do both because it is 24 hours. So I wouldn't say it's crucial to our message, or nor are we going to necessarily be able to on ramp a really heavy crypto person into a defense deal. But you have to at least have the right pointers to have to be on their radar. And if they do happen to come across your press release or your deck or an interview, they need to be able to understand the story and connect with somebody on that team. Because I do think that pool of money that's sitting in crypto is very untapped right now by the market, and particularly in life science, and resource mining, probably in defense as well. Technology companies obviously have a bit of a better grasp on it. They are doing a better job to on ramp some of these individuals, but it is something important to consider in any new company's messaging, is how to potentially attract that crypto money to come and play a part in their deal.
Well, I know a lot of folks in the Canadian markets, they have put crypto into their deals, either as their currency and the way they've been banking, as I believe Red Light Holland did for their psychedelic deal. They started banking with crypto, and so I imagine that would be a way to on ramp some of that pool of capital sitting on the sidelines. But in terms of just the value proposition of the Canadian Securities Exchange, for example, is that regulatory side, is that appealing? The safety that at least there's these rules and laws and regulators in place that are designed to protect the investor. Like how does that communication work for cryptocurrency that's sidelined right now?
That's a great point, and I think the exchange could probably do some work to help communicate that message in a more serious way. I know lots of people that have lost money through scams and fraud in crypto. Sure, it can still happen in the stock market. You can invest in a pump and dump lifestyle CEO who could not do well with your investment, but it's way more prevalent in crypto. And that is definitely an advantage to coming in and investing in a stock. In terms of the companies that are trying to include a little bit of crypto into their story, I think there's definitely room for that. But I do think a lot of crypto blockchain investors just see that little bit as ambulance chasing too. I don't think it's something that you necessarily need to do.
It's
We've
not
seen this.
authentic all the time, right? I mean, like the lack of authenticity, it appears that, hey, we're throwing this into our deal just to attract it, as opposed to this is a quality deal or a need for banking purposes, like some deals have. So I wonder, in general, when you're talking about the capital markets and the transparency that you get, is there a way that companies can be more transparent with their marketing? So if there is like, you can at least communicate to investors that the risk of a pump and dump is less because we're full kimono about what our marketing plan is, or what are some of the safeguards that could be in place that aren't being utilized right now to give investor confidence to marketing and what could be an authentic deal.
Yeah, I do think that there's a lot of work that can be done, and there's some great examples of companies doing this right now, where you're over communicating to the shareholder, especially as you're coming into listing as a private company going public. There's no, I don't think, any real reason that you have to legally communicate every single detail with your seed round investors. Obviously, once you're public, you have to disclose your information. But I do think this is an era of information gluttony. There's information just getting spewed at everyone 24 hours a day through news, social media, whatever platforms they're on. And again, to help cut through that, I think having trustworthy, honest communication with your shareholders and your potential shareholders on the market is really important through, frequent press releases, video communications, but most importantly, just direct email communication with your shareholders. I think that's kind of the cornerstone that needs to be done. And you'd be surprised, again, seeing this from the sidelines, working on the marketing end of these companies externally over the last 7 years, is a lot of companies are not communicating with their shareholders nearly as much as they could be. So I think that's a
Well, I
really
mean,
a really piece of low hanging fruit there.
yeah, that's not always nefarious reasons, right? I mean, people get in a startup, they put their heads down, they get in the work, and they're busy, right? So, in terms of communication, the lifestyle CEO that you talk about, where they're self dealing with various different parts of the deal that may not be transparently disclosed, or may be disclosed in a way that's hidden from investors. So, I guess at the end of the day, maybe the best workaround is just to put, the company should put themselves in the shoes of an investor. What I always tell folks when I'm advising them on how to handle investor communications is, I'm a lawyer, I'm professional fiduciary. So if you look at your shareholders like their clients, Like, what would my client need to make a decision on such and such case as a lawyer? Like, for me at my law firm, the way I've always trained our attorneys is you give them all the news you can get and you tell them about it and you just bombard them with information and then you distill it down to what you think's the most important. You identify the risks and the possible upsides and downsides. You try to communicate how big those risks are. I know that's difficult for public markets because we also have folks are also very worried about making any statements of certainty, right? So everything's a risk in the public markets, and it's sort of buyer beware on an investor side to figure out the risk, the value of the risk for themselves. But at least the risk needs to be identified, and as much information as possible needs to be thrown out there for the investors to do their due diligence on their own time. For instance, as you mentioned before, and we've talked about walking into the Born Defense deal, like the more information you can put out there in terms of interviews about deal flow for like an investment issuer like Born Defense, or about the participants in the deal, the players on the management team, just having information so these shareholders, these potential investors can look folks, quote unquote, in the eye the best they can on video and just decide, do I trust these guys or forget about them. I'm going to move on. And they don't pass the smell test. I don't feel good about them. I mean, they at least should have that opportunity, right? Like, for better or for worse, just get information out there and let people make the decisions for themselves beyond just a bunch of paper on a listing statement.
Yeah, that's a fair statement, and I think it's really important to understand that many investors are just coming in because they want to see a multiplication on their investment. And you have to understand that there are those two types of investors. There's an investor that really believes in the company and vision, and they're probably going to ride it out, whatever happens within reason. But then there's also the investor that sees what we just talked about, the timing, the team, access to capital, news flow. They think they're going to make, 2x, 3x, whatever their goal is, and they're going to be in and out. And that's good. That's a good thing. We want that sort of activity in the market and want to be able to supply wins for those types of people and traders. And too often people focus very heavily on their ride or die investors that will go to 1 cent, whatever with them. So I think it is important to understand again that there is a bit of a negative skew, I would say, from the company side on day traders and volume and investors coming in and out. But that's part of what makes a good stock and what makes an interesting story. And you'll have lots of content online and people talking about you on the various forums is appealing to both those groups. But the nice thing is both of those groups want to see approximately the same thing. Really comes down to communication.
Yeah, and I think on the day trader side, which I think people often unfairly classify them as gamblers, and that they focus more on the long-term holders, but they are very valuable because they add liquidity to the market. Without liquidity, what's the point of going public? Like, what's the point of having shares that you can capitalize and you can sell pieces of your company to if folks, when they buy in, they can't sell because a market needs buyers and sellers. Like, we love holders, keeps we love long-term relationships with people. They're very valuable and they're our teammates, but the buyers and sellers are our teammates too. Like, you need sellers in order to have buyers, right? You need to have the ask and the bid get close to each other so a deal can be made and stock can trade. So is there a different messaging you do to these folks, or is just transparency the key regardless?
I think transparency is the key, but also it's important to understand too, further to your point, that my understanding of the institutional side, which I'll admit is a lot lighter than the retail market. But my understanding is that institutional investor and taking that deal or that company to the next level, it requires volume in the market. So again, it's not even that it's good to have or that, we've talked about reasons why it's beneficial, but it's almost crucial to get to that next step. And I think in terms of the marketing, again, you need to really hammer on the timing. The people that are in the story for the long run, they're going to resonate with your story and your brand. They're going to want to see letter from the CEO or video interview with the CEO and communications and new websites and decks. That trader, that person that sees an opportunity and is going to jump on it, it's probably going to be catalyst driven with news. And that comes back to the at least the Canadian markets right now, as well as the US and global markets is it's been a bit rocky in the small cap world for some time now. But the last few months have started to really be red hot, even in the small cap sectors. So again, you're kind of getting this perfect alchemy of team, funding, timing, and project news flow, where I think it's really a great opportunity for companies, including Born Defense, but other issuers, to take advantage of right now and get their story out to the market.
Yeah, speaking of getting stories out right now, like what's hot and what's not, and what's the issue on timing, right? There's been a lot of talk in the capital markets, watching Palmer Luckey's story go forth on his defense company, watching the news releases and the articles about uh, uh, increasing NATO defense spending. But generally, the defense market has historically been a little more quiet, a little more institutional. I mean, a lot of reasons is a lot of things go behind closed doors, and not everything is public and easily accessible. And there's just maybe a more traditional viewing on that. So in terms of heading into like an openness and transparent branding, storytelling uh, vision for a defense company, how can that happen in this digital transformation age? Are there any tips that you see, like as far as the way technology is coming down the pike for telling these stories, or anything unique about the traditional defense market in general?
Yeah, and this is part of what drew me in the first place to our conversations, Mike, on Born Defense. Is it's an industry that I honestly have not had a lot of experience with from the small cap perspective over the last few years. There isn't a lot of new small cap, micro cap, new listings in the defense sector, at least in Canada and Australia and the US. There's some, but there's not a lot, which is interesting. Especially given the state of the world, I would have assumed that there would be a lot more. So as you said, there's regulatory reasons, there's banking reasons, there's lots of there's clandestine reasons why a lot of these businesses remain private, and that's fine and dandy. But it's sort of like what we were doing on our nickel company. It's really important, I think, to present these opportunities to the market in an honest and transparent way, should an investor want to get into the sector. And bypass the regulatory or the bad actors or other individuals that they might not want to invest in, or they might simply just not have that appetite to invest in a large scale company, blue chip company. They want to get that early hunger and that potential for large multipliers on their investment. So I think that's going to be really important. And again, just the differences in the sectors, but also a lot of similarities. There's this understanding in mining that I know quite well, and I always am going to come back to the mining because that's been the bread and butter over the years. But your average person, that isn't involved in capital markets, that isn't involved in industry, they say, okay, maybe a bit of a dirty industry or something that they're not too interested in, but they're more than happy to pick up their cell phone and get in their car and drive to work and use their computer, right? And that's kind of obvious. A lot of people will probably roll their eyes at that. It's an oversimplification, sure, but you want to provide that startup capital and branding and opportunity into a vertical that hopefully will actually provide some value and create some materials in the long run. And I see that as the same in the defense sector right now. Every major company seems to be increasing their country seems to be increasing their budgets for spending. Where is this money going to go? Is it going to go to certain actors or different individuals and companies? Maybe we can present an opportunity to the market that's going to be transparent and have an opportunity to present to the market again a good investment thesis.
Yeah, when I think about like people want to effectuate change, in a sort of geopolitical viewpoint, like we have a lot of conversations going on in the United States, Canada too, about which direction do we take a country internally. But one direction we always got to be paying attention to is that outward looking direction. Like the number one goal of any government institution, any government, particularly a government of a nation, is order, to protect its citizens from disorder, from non-state sanctioned violence, from chaos, from invasion, from threats from its neighbors, threats from terrorists, threats from the outside, threats from the inside that may be looking to bring down order and make safety a thing of the past. And then to balance that with the freedoms that we in the United States and folks in Canada and other countries around the world, sort of inherited from 1776 and the game plan that we've been implementing in this experiment of representative democracy. So I think it's interesting that we can vote for a person, for a party, and that vote can count in changing the direction of a company, outward facing, how it deals with its allies and enemies. But we can also vote with our pocketbooks on how we want a defense industry to look. Like, what sort of people do we want to support? And in a way, I think that this is a very wonderful democratic opportunity. A lot of folks have been sitting on the sidelines in the defense space and haven't invested in the defense space in the past because they find it morally repugnant in terms of the neocon war machine and profits over people, and a perception that we've been in these forever wars. And if there are people out there that are interested in peace through strength and know that the best way to defeat a bully is to make sure that bully's too scared to step onto the playground, because you're prepared there with your own fighting skills and your buddies surrounding you, making yourself a very hard target. So I'm wondering if the transparency that's been largely avoided historically by keeping nimble companies private in the early stages, maybe it's not just access to capital that can drive folks to the public markets, but it's the access to the transparency that is an important in and of itself, because sunlight's the best disinfectant, and a transparent government is what we thrive on. Here in the United States, with our public records laws, with our ability to pry into what's going on in government. We can complain about it and say it's not good enough or it goes too far because of doxing or other reasons, but just opening up that kimono and saying, here's how we're going to spend the money. Here's the deals we're going to be investing in. Here's why we think they're good. If we're not being just or we're backing the wrong guys, vote down, sell your stock. You can communicate through investor relations, through shouting out into the world, catching people's attention. But you can say, I support you by buying more. I don't support you by buying less. And I'm wondering if that level of transparency and the way the capital markets have a check on bad actors, if it could be something to have other nimble startups aspire to when entering the defense space. You have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, and I had in my notes again exactly what you said. It's a beautiful thing, but part of the market that's always fascinated me is that voting with your pocketbook. People from all over the world can have a little piece and say into what folks are doing in other parts of the world. You don't need to be a citizen of that country. You don't need to go through the process. Again, Canada and the States, regardless of what's going on politically right now, we're able to invest in each other's companies and each other's deals, and we're able to have a collaborative vision regardless of what else is going on. So I think that's really important for our Canadian shareholders and listeners today is, again, you're able to make a positive impact in what you are doing with your finances and what you're doing by this voting with your pocketbook. And it is important, again, like you said, the transparency is key, and that's going to be crucial for moving forward with foreign defense, is being transparent with what we're doing, and with of course, with the regulatory bodies and the exchanges, but also with the investor. And that's the special sauce of being a small cap publicly traded defense company.
Yeah, just that communication, the relationships. So as far as the digital transformation and the technological advancements that are happening in the defense space, we hear a lot about AI, about drones, about cybersecurity. But what sort of technology has advanced for purposes of shaping how companies can communicate with investors? How does that change over the last few years?
It's been fascinating, and we've seen a few come out of the woodwork. And just as one example of the many is leveraging AI for communication with shareholders. So I have a good friend and consultant here in Alberta. He's put together a company called Answer with an IR, and it really is a phone system and a communication system to communicate your news and your milestones to your shareholders. And that's just so fascinating to me. As again, you're not using just a chat bot that's going to pull from the internet. You're able to provide this AI skin bot a full-fledged set of instructions, only pull information from our news releases, only pull information
Yeah.
from our company deck. And then they're able to go out and make sure that your investors do hear your story. So again, in this loud world, maybe they miss seeing your press release. Maybe that email, got too far in their inbox and they missed it. But maybe then they'll get a phone call that from the AI of the company that's going to just not put any buy recommendations or sell recommendations, obviously, but just hey Steve, have you seen our news release today? No, okay. Well, here's an update on the news, what it means for the company. If you have any questions, book a meeting with the CEO. Have a great day. That's a massive tool. I think that's going to be really game changing. There's a few companies doing this already, and I think that's really the most interesting thing I've seen in the last few months.
I think one of the scariest things for folks in the public markets is saying too much. Like we're always worried about saying something that's not public information because that's not fair, right? That reason that the market rules exist is because you want everybody in the that's buying and selling to have the same information at the same time. And a lot of CEOs and marketing folks that are telling their story to capital markets, they're hesitant to speak other than through talking points because they don't want to provide too much information. So I do think that AI can be a very useful tactic there, because you could have an entire LLM set aside with here's the 100% of the public information. Here's the release. Here's the deck. Here's everything that we put out into the market. But it's so hard for like a small investor to go out and do the due diligence. So, I mean, you could take the time, I suppose, and upload all of the data that you get out of CDAR and upload transcripts of CEO conversations into ChatGPT, for instance, and then start asking it questions. Or perhaps in the future, companies will have AI set up on their website where someone can come in and just start asking questions, and you get 100% of the details that are publicly available. Have you seen any tools like that out in the market yet?
Yeah, my understanding is this one I mentioned is that sort of an offering where it does have that communication on the website as well. And again, that's not a plug for that specific company. There's other groups offering this, but I think it is for both ends of the spear, right? You need to have communication with your existing shareholders, and you need to have an easy, digestible information source for new shareholders. And we talk about this all the time in the market with other clients as well and issuers. Is again your news is going to create catalyst events and exciting opportunities for new shareholders to buy your stock. But you need to continue communicating and holding value to your current shareholders so that they continue to hold your stock or buy more. If you don't engage with one or the other of these two groups, it's going to be really difficult to continue to move in the right direction and grow your company. So these tools that like AI and other tools that are coming online right now, I think will really speed up the process and just streamline the flexibility of the team being able to do both. Hunt for those new investors and keep your current shareholders happy.
Yeah, because like the whole purpose of this is, ostensibly because you want access to capital. It's the capital markets for a reason. And if you can attract those institutional investors that can come in sort of a later stage of a company's development, that's going to be because there's liquidity, because there's people interested in the deal, and because the shareholder base is broad enough to support new investment coming in, and thus those investors exiting in a safe and predictable way. So that's the risk that institutional investors need to mitigate is, well, if we come in, will anybody be available to buy the stock? And that's always the tension that companies have is how do you communicate this in a safe way that doesn't get you in trouble with the regulators because you said something in an interview that you didn't put in a press release yet. At the same time, is trying to satiate investors' need for having up-to-date information. So that's why I'm really curious to see how that database would develop where, when you got gun-shy communicators at a company that are afraid of overindulging in an interview, saying too much and drawing the ire of a regulator, that if there is this database of 100% of the information that's public, here's everything we have, ask us some questions, and if the AI, for instance, doesn't have the answer, it gets in a really efficient way put up to a human being to address that question, either put it in the database for future questions or be able to get in front of it and do a press release or an interview as quickly as possible. So I'm looking forward to that development, just as I'm looking forward and kind of scared in some aspects on how AI is going to affect national security, right? So I mean, there's the good and the bad, and it's our job to leverage the technology available to do our jobs, which is to tell the story as transparently as the regulators will allow us. So just to kind of move into the deal we're working on right now, your involvement in Born Defense, and sort of how you got involved with us, and sort of defense marketing as a whole. We talked about it being traditionally quiet, but with Born Defense in the defense sector, just beyond the increase in spending, like what excites you about this company or the market in general?
Yeah, as you mentioned, we've seen some exciting success stories that are really generating some online interest and following with. You have Anduril and its peers that are really coming online. You also have this is a bit outside defense, but it's servicing the defense industry. You have Oklo, the uranium nuclear reactor company that's come online this year. And again, you're seeing a bit of a shift, and we've talked about this even from a marketing perspective: is who's your demographic and who are you advertising to? But you are seeing a bit of a let's say a younger and more tech savvy, interested investor that's really kind of piling on to these defense deals or the defense adjacent deals in a certain way. So I found that really interesting as a starter, just reading about all this in the news, seeing the success of Oppo's listing, and then what's coming up for Anduril and the kind of breakoffs from Meta with Lucky Palmer. But beyond that, I just also saw the opportunity of that. Okay, I don't really see any microcap defense companies right now. This doesn't make a lot of sense. There's got to be some opportunity. And then the ones I do see, there's not a lot of information about them necessarily, right? There's some good ones coming up now, but I would say that's relatively recent in the last few months. So again, I saw a bit of an opportunity, but like anything, you have to align yourself with the right team. And your brainchild of pulling this together really, really got me fascinated from the beginning.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'm glad we have a chance to work together a little more closely, shepherding this deal forward. But I find that interesting that you're looking across the market, you're comparing other businesses, you're seeing what the market differentiator is for Born Defense versus others. You're looking at the competitive landscape, and that's really the rub, right? Is like, okay, there's maybe not some peers that directly align. That could be great if timing is right, or it could be very bad because you're too early, right? And I guess that's the excitement of a space like this, is not just that this is probably the most important issue that humanity faces, which is the destruction of civilization as we know it from our enemies or from war in general. I mean, this has been the plague of humanity since Iraq was picked up. Right? Since brother against brother, since one of the first stories of Genesis, it's always about fighting amongst your neighbors and your brothers. And it's our job as men, as mankind, to insulate ourselves from the enemy, right? From the folks that want to do us harm, from the thieves of joy that will go and disrupt their neighbor by an invasion, or from a cyber attack and disrupt commerce, or anything that can happen in this space. Now that's exciting. But then there's the exciting part on the investment side, is the timing correct? And I guess that's for the investor to decide, and that's sort of the game that's played there. But all we can do as a company, all other companies can do, is just do their best, tell their story, and keep on fighting the good fight, and hopefully getting their message out there and getting it noticed. So I really want to thank you for your time on this call, Carl. I know we talk a lot, and we are always bouncing ideas back and forth, and you've been just a wonderful resource. And I want to take this opportunity to thank you for getting involved and taking this leap of faith in Born Defense. And I look forward to chatting with you some more, and maybe doing a couple more of these interviews as we update the market as we move along.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, it's been a pleasure, and really excited for what the next few months will hold for this company.